So as you know, one of the hardest things about being a reader is picking what book you want to read next. So I hit up my good buddy, Petrik. He's the best reviewer on Goodreads for anything fantasy or really any book that he reads. Respect his opinion a lot, and he brought up a book that he considers to be the greatest indie release of all time. And I jumped into it, I loved it, and I'm here to review it today. And that book is The Sword, I think you can see it, right? The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. And I did actually end up reading this on my Kindle. I liked it so much, I went ahead and ordered the softback because I want to support indie authors. And this is actually the first indie book we've reviewed here on the Fantasy Network. And if this is the level that indie fantasy has gotten to, I can tell you that I am absolutely all in and will be reviewing a lot more indie fantasy books. And I also just want you to note that the book is actually available for free on the Kindle store if you have Prime, which most of the world does now, I think. Bezos rules the world. But if you have Amazon Prime, you can get it on Prime Reading for free. You can download it to your Kindle. If you don't have a Kindle, you can download it on your phone, tablet, computer, whatever, any electronic device that can get the Kindle app. And I highly recommend you check it out for free. $0. That's criminal. It should never cost $0. I actually ended up buying the ebook of it too, just to support the author. You don't have to do all of that, but you should definitely check it out and also leave a review. The Sword of Kaigen setting, it takes place on the peninsula of the Kaigenese Empire. I believe it is Takayubi. I have notes here. Yes, Takayubi. There are quite a few eccentric names that I wouldn't normally pronounce every day, so I did have to actually make some notes, and I hope I pronounce everything correctly. But yes, the small village of Takayubi is our home in this Japanese-inspired fantasy. The Empire is feeding their citizens very dangerous propaganda and kind of suppressing knowledge. Pretty bad stuff, and they're very military-focused. And Takayubi's actually very behind the times. I couldn't tell if the entire Empire was or if it was literally just Takayubi, but this world does have like televisions and cell phones, so it was almost steampunky in that regard, to where like you're seeing like future technology and cars, and they've been to space. They mentioned a little bit there. There's hints that there have been satellites and maybe even spacecraft that have went to space, and there are fighter jets and such. But in Takayubi, it's a very traditional style culture through family values, and obviously with the military training. When the kids go to school, they're going to be doing combat and training to be in the military because they are the Sword of Kaigen. And the culture being traditional, whether that's right or not, is also very sexist. The wife is expected to stay home and take care of the kids, not to speak unless spoken to. Pretty harsh stuff. And if that's something you're like, oh, well, I'm not reading that, I don't agree with that at all, I want you to know that it is not just a flat out, this is how things are. This is a deep inspection of what is wrong with traditional cultures and what is wrong whenever family values and cultural values, societal norms in these kinds of places, what happens when they're questioned? What happens whenever they're pushed past the bounds of what's normal? And it addresses several different issues, but I'm going to get into that a little bit later. So yeah, the world is very vast, and it's pretty well explained, and I thought pretty well thought out. This is only a 600-page book. This book made every use of every single word. I didn't think there was anything wasted. Nothing felt like fluff, and the world building continued almost until the end of the book, which I just thought was really neat. You see a lot of info dumps in fantasy, and again, expecting, I didn't know what to expect from an indie author. And Wang absolutely took advantage of the reader's time and made sure that it was well used. I would give the world building like a solid B+ to maybe an A-. I thought it was just tremendous, and really enjoyed the fact that I learned about other cultures without going to those places, and just in dialogue. Again, not info dumps, but through natural conversation. Something she did with multiple facets of her story that I thought were just really spot on. And these different regions have different elemental powers. That's kind of where the magic system comes from. It's not really soft, but it's not hard. It's not like a Brandon Sanderson magic system, in case you're wondering, but very elemental. So different regions can do like fire. Here in the Kaigenese Peninsula that we're on, it seems to be that it's all about ice and water and manipulating those kind of elements. Kind of Avatar: The Last Airbender vibe, if you're into that. Actually, when I started the book, it really reminded me of Avatar: The Last Airbender. but it subverted all those expectations, and that's all I'm going to say, but if you read it, you'll know what I mean. So our cast of characters, relatively small. I would say there's about probably maybe less than 20 named characters that you have to keep track of, and some of them are just one-offs, but there's 3, 4, 5 characters we get really in-depth and details about, and there's really 2 POVs with an extra POV at one point in the book that you get just at one little section, which was absolutely so perfectly used and placed. Me and Petrik talked about it, and he actually said how perfect it was, and I said it was. It was amazing, and it couldn't have been done any better. So when you read, you'll see what I mean. But really, 2 main POVs, and that is through the eyes of a mother in these war times and of her son. It's very unique. That's the best thing I can say about this book. It's so unique and so original. It's through a different lens. It's definitely through a different lens than we're used to in this fantasy genre. And I actually fell in love with a lot of the side characters that were very well written. And again, not telling us about them, but showing us through the dialogue. I mentioned that earlier. And that really shined through with the characters. I got to know many of the side characters that had impacts on the story, but not in a terribly deep way. But I got to know them. I kind of felt like I understood the culture of the people on the peninsula and like the small fisher villages and such. And again, that was all just through showing me, whether it be through scenes or dialogue. That's like one of my favorite things an author can do, and Wang absolutely crushed it. Also, if you've ever watched any of my reviews, I'm not a huge fan of kid characters. I just feel like sometimes they can come off whiny or maybe even manufactured to be that. But this is the best personification of children I've ever seen, and I'm talking all the way down to a toddler. I thought she took very good care of the details, and with a lot of skill was able to paint a realistic version of what a child would be like in these times. And also just some of them are like just adorable. Like she just wrote them very well. Definitely the best kids in a cast I've ever seen. And so the plot of Sword of Kaigen, I've kind of mentioned, is a wartime story, and you get all of the action you would expect in that setting and a whole hell of a lot more. And without getting too into the weeds, because this is spoiler free, I just want to say the most endearing portion of the story that Wang was telling here was the structure. You keep hearing me call it unique. The climax comes about midway through the book, and it's very out of left field. It subverted a lot of my expectations for what was going to happen with the rest of the book. It kind of blew me away and executed very well. But then there's another climax. Everything past the midpoint, if you consider that the climax in the story, I think there's actually 2. But after the first climax, everything past that kind of feels like an epilogue, a very detailed epilogue, and in the best way. Some people might take that negatively. It's not. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it in she took a chance to tell her story in a different format than what a lot of other people will, and it paid off in dividends for me, and if you go look at the ratings, obviously for a lot of viewers. Viewers, readers, you know what I meant. And all I'm going to say, and I'm not going to harp on the plot too much because that's part of the fun of this book, it was perfectly executed, absolutely flawless. Anyone can read this story, and whether you don't like the setting or maybe you don't care for all of the characters, though I thought they were great. I think, and honestly, Misaki, which I hope I'm saying that name right, I think that she might be top 3 protagonist I've ever read. I really believe that. And Takaru as well, kind of a main character, but just, wow, the evolution of him through Misaki's eyes was something that was compelling and everyone should read. But even if you didn't like the characters somehow, I don't know how you could not. I think anyone could read this plot and read this story and connect with it and enjoy it. The only drawback to this book, there's 2. I think some people might get a little flustered. There's a lot of made-up terminology in this book, but there is a glossary in the back, and I didn't actually even flip to the glossary. The author gives a note that you can download like a separate PDF on your Kindle so you can like context switch easier. I didn't use it. I just kind of used context clues and picked up on what certain terms meant, and I didn't take away from the story for me at all. I was kind of buckled in for the ride, and it didn't take away anything from me, but I do know some people who are just trying to do some easier reading. They don't want to flip to the back of the book to figure out what, this term means. I get that. So if you're not into made-up terminology or custom language, really, you might not love it, But again, for someone who didn't really want to flip back and forth, I thought it didn't detract from the story at all. Now, the other con, and it's not a con, but I think people will raise an eyebrow to this, and there's a bit of a vigilante angle, without giving anything away. Kind of weird. This book does a lot. This book did a lot. Some different themes, different scenarios, and different kinds of action. But there is a vigilante plot that first I raised my eyebrows, and I wasn't sure, and I was almost a little apprehensive, like, oh no, this is going to take a terrible left turn. But it worked. It worked, and that's the best thing I can say about this book, with the qualms I had with it, is that it ended up working. Everything ended up fitting the story, and it all came together like a perfect puzzle. At the end, I wanted to read more. I want more of this. Like, I could read a direct sequel to this and be enthralled. And it's special because it takes a different focus on wartime, especially that we're used to in the fantasy genre, but even from everyday life, when we look at war from the macro, this puts a microscope on the situation. It takes a detailed observation of the effects of war and violent acts and the trauma that's imposed on everyday people or people who are on the front lines. It takes so many sensitive topics like family traditions and sexism within those traditions and puts them at the forefront of the conflict. And not only in the external conflicts, but the internal conflicts that we see inside of our characters. I found this book, if I'm being honest, to speak to me in a very personal manner. I recently had a death in the family and lost a childhood pet that I had had around for almost 20 years. And it spoke to me because this book covers the theme of grief. And it covers it in a way that I've never seen before in any medium, whether it be fantasy or books or movies. It doesn't matter. It spoke to me on a very personal level. And I came out of this feeling a little bit enlightened, but also just better. And that, to me, is the best thing a book can do, is not only entertain you, but affect you. It challenges the fact that we should always blindly listen to our governments. It takes a step towards addressing oppressive cultures and so-called family traditions and values. It simply had it all. The Sword of Kaigen challenges what is honorable and compares that to what is right. And sometimes the conflicts that we face are all in our head and we don't consider how the other person is feeling. It's also a lot about communication. This book is about communicating with people in the toughest of times, and even when you think you might be willing to kill this other person, to still hear them out. Powerful. It was powerful. That's the best word. That's the word to describe the book. Not just unique, but powerful. I give this book a 5 out of 5. I told you I'm not doing star ratings anymore, but I just need you to know 5 out of 5. You can check out my review on Goodreads, short and sweet. Absolutely gets the Golden Acorn Award. It will be up for one of the best books I read in 2020. And I implore you, there is no such thing as a must-read in the fantasy genre. Some people might disagree. I don't think there's a must-read. But this is as close as it gets for modern fantasy. And if you're going to read any indie books, any fiction, it doesn't have to be fantasy, this is the one. This is the one. And I hope it doesn't spoil me. But wow. Bravo, M.L. Wang. I thought the book was damn near flawless. And I look forward to hopefully reading more of her work. She has written 2 other novels, and this was a prequel to the trilogy, but I believe the 3rd book is on the hiatus, so we'll see what happens there. If she finishes it, I'm picking it up, and I'm definitely reading through it. I love the magic system. I adored the world, and she knows how to write a hell of a protagonist. And remember, the book's free on Prime Reading. Go check it out. And thank you so much for spending your time here. I did change the setup, as you can tell. I want to be a little more comfortable. I'm hanging out. I'm drinking some high-quality H2O. And I got some new bookcases, right? It's cool. That's Arya's Dagger, which she used in Season 8, if you have watched that. And, just trying out some new things. I didn't put an intro into the beginning of this video. Did you like it? If you're a subscriber, watch my videos. Do you prefer the intro? Do you not? Let me know. I need feedback because that's the only way I can get better at producing content for you and building this community. And hey, if you're a new viewer and you enjoyed the video and you haven't hit subscribe yet, drop down there, slap the subscribe button, hit like. You can turn on the bell if you want to know when I post new videos. That's generally weekly. Last week I did take off because of world events. I felt like it wasn't an opportune time to review a book. I got some really good reviews coming up, and I think I'm going to do a couple top 10 lists just because it's always fun, riffing off about fantasy. And I really, again, can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day to watch my videos. If you'd like to look through my other videos, please go ahead and work your way through those. I'm going to definitely have more up in the future, but there's some good stuff in the past. My ideas on Brandon Sanderson, Rage of Dragons is another really amazing novel. And I also covered the entire Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne, which if you haven't heard, I highly recommend. But be safe, be good, and I'll see you again real soon. Go nuts.